All right, folks, welcome to another episode of 120 Months, a show where we are talking about way too much music from the 1990s. I am pleased to be joined by a special guest, David Humphries. He is a professor at Queensborough Community College in New York City and the author of many pieces, but one that caught my attention because on the first episode of this podcast, my co-host and I, John Lombardo, really appreciated and loved the music of the Sundays, in particular the album that came out in January 1990 called Reading, Writing, and Arithmetic. And it turns out, and I was reminded of this because David Humphries was a guest on my other podcast called Nostalgia Trap, that he wrote a really great piece all about this album and the feeling of the Sundays and a particular nostalgic moment in the 90s. I will link that article in the episode description. It's called A Couple Centuries of Sundays. And for anyone that has any memories of the 90s and going to college and a particular kind of aesthetic and feel of that moment, I think the article will ring some bells for you. So, David Humphries, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thank you, fellow David. So I just wanted to put a quick plug in and explain where my thinking is, whether you like it or not. If you listen to this episode, I hope you do. You'll learn more things about me. So I told David I took notes because I realized when I started thinking about this, I was so excited when you contact me that I had like that fire hose for like I have 10 things I want to say, but they're all the first things. So hopefully we find other things. But if while you're talking, I'm like scratching on my paper, it's like, okay, anyway. I did want to mention when you had me on, it was really a cool experience in January. To full disclosure, I had listened to, a few of the Nostalgia Trap, but I was not a Patreon member. And we were just chatting for a minute before we started. And I just want to plug your show, uh, because if you do subscribe, you get the news trap, and we have a lot of full disclosures here. So I'm now a member at the lowest Cub junior level or
A
whatever,
member
but
of the club. Yeah.
member of the club, and we have a mutual friend, Justin Rogers Cooper, and literally, and I'm glad you haven't had a Netflix crackdown on password sharing because as you found out, I share my password with my family here for my Patreon account. But it's really a lot of added value. And I mean, I'm also I wouldn't say mostly because I love when you kind of have your rants and your specific readings, but Justin does like such a deep dive in the news that it literally is my go-to first when it pops up in my feed. It's the first thing I listen to.
That's so cool. I know I've heard that from a lot of people. I think Justin is a really special part of what we do, and he's someone who this might link up to the Sundays a little bit,
It will, I'm sure.
because he, Justin is someone who I met in graduate school, and he's one of those people that I think is the reason why I still have a certain kind of romance with the academic world because you
Hmm.
meet people like Justin who are sort of alive with ideas. And I met him in classes that were because he was not in the same department as I. He was in the English department, and I was
Right,
in
right.
history. But we took cinema studies classes together. We ended up in classes talking about movies, and I was just like, who is this guy who would raise his hand in class and offer
Yeah.
these insane rants on movies with just like really, really amazing insights. And I just love the way that he combined so many different disciplines in the way he talked. And that has turned into a lifelong friendship and
That's
yeah,
awesome.
a podcast series with us talking about the
Well,
news.
let me continue my full disclosure, and I'm happy to have some happy vibes, man. These are not the happiest times.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. Yeah.
I didn't know.
Agreed.
So Justin and I have somewhat parallel lives. I've only gotten to know him better the last few years, but Justin and I both have our main gig at a community college in CUNY. I'm also a grad of the English PhD program at the GC. Two of the words I want to make sure we use here, keywords. One is disdain, which I will be using self-referentially, because when you get into like indie music, the disdain. But the other thing I wanted to, when I was kind of thinking things I wanted to talk about are micro generation. So it's really interesting and kind of starting where you're with, because it will become quickly evident. I graduated high school in 1989, and I'm a few years older than you and Justin. So I didn't know Justin when he was a student or you.
Hmm.
I finished at the GC, the CUNY Graduate Center in 2004. But Justin, I think this will be relevant to the Sundays. my main gig's at a community college, but I also teach in the Master in Liberal Studies program, in mostly American Studies courses there for master's students. And it's a real privilege to kind of keep it real because when you're at an open admissions community college anywhere, rural or urban, and I know you have some really cool in your podcast, Pete, about being an adjunct. Like you learn a lot about people, and then to teach, advanced students, and that's when I got to know Justin. We've collaborated on syllabi, and he was a part of an important part of the Happy Nostalgia project. So I only recently got to know Justin a lot better, and so kind of moving a little to me, but again, I totally. It's worth the Patreon subscription for sure to hear the
Thank you for the
and well,
plug. I
one
appreciate it.
last
Yeah.
point about that, because Justin is a big part of that. But one thing I like, and also makes me a little scared here because we're recording, is I really like how you think through issues. And, that's a real issue in academia. And you talk about this, sort of we have a very obvious right-wing censorship regime going on, but sometimes you do feel constrained. I hesitate to use like a word like wokeness, but you do sometimes feel like, can I think through an issue or do I have to already be at the right answer? And
Right.
I like your
Right.
podcast that you like, I don't always agree with you, but I always agree with your process, how you're like trying to be a curious person in the world that's like in a little bit of disarray at the moment.
Yeah,
So
totally. Yeah, I
real
mean, we're all
quickly,
lost.
we're all a little, and it makes everything a little different, a little harder. So real quickly to kind of pick up on like the happy nostalgia and just where I am so we can get into the topic here. In the last couple of years, I've been an administrator, so I published two articles. One is the couple centuries of Sundays, which was self-published, but with a number of professors. We call it public scholarship these days. That's free, and you can link in. Another was an article on being, it's kind of a crossover. I guess the buzzwords would be critical university studies and memoirs. So I'm kind of working on three projects right now. I have a memoir draft that's done. If any junior editors or agents are looking, it's very hard to like share a memoir with your normal writing group, but it's about working at Calvary Cemetery in Youngstown, Ohio in 1991 when it was making a bid for the murder capital of the United States. I think we came in fourth. It was a pretty dark time. And when you're working at a cemetery and you're in college, you have a particular take on what's going on. And as a white male, I wasn't likely to get murdered, but it turned out my first coworker did get murdered that I worked there at the cemetery. And it
Wow.
has a lot of the elements of Youngstown crime, mafia, steel mills, and also being a college student. And, it's that kind of memoir. So that's very relevant because that summer I listened to the Sundays every day,
At
either on
this
my
at the
Walkman at
cemetery.
work. Yeah,
Yeah. And I love that you
yeah,
in your article you mentioned making a tape of the CD so that you could listen to the Walkman at the cemetery. And
totally.
just a quick note on Youngstown, Ohio. I just read a piece by David Gran in his book The Devil and Sherlock Holmes, all about Youngstown, Ohio, and the sort of like mafia presence there. And there was a U.S. representative, I'm forgetting his name now,
Jim Trafficant,
yeah, there you go. Who was like a really flamboyant dude. I
very
had no,
flamboyant.
yeah, I had no, I ultimately went to prison. I had no idea about that history, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and if because I don't know how interesting my life is to others, but to add a little spice to that, I was at the gravesite of Joey Naples, who got gunned down that summer. He was the last of the famous mob bosses. A lot of people think Gotti was behind it because Youngstown's equidistant from Pittsburgh and Cleveland, which plays a lot into our sports psychology, and it's
Yeah,
also equidistant between Chicago and New York. So, and it's on Route 80. So a lot of people drive through, and these mafia spheres from Al Capone to the Gotti family kind of met in Youngstown. So it was always a borderland in that way. And just by chance, I happened to be there the day that they brought Joey Naples to Calvary Cemetery to be buried, make his
wow.
last trip.
Okay, so let's get to
Um,
reading,
let's
writing,
get
and
to reading, right?
arithmetic.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and thank you. Yeah, we had a bit of a preamble.
Because this album and the thing that maybe I can just read a quick paragraph from your piece because this is what resonated with me and then we can
Okay.
go in whatever direction you want to go. But you talk about the video for Here's Where the Story Ends, which was ended up being I think it was John's choice on the episode about January 1990 for his like song of the month. That one stuck out to him. And
Hmm.
I love that song, and this is what how you describe the video and what it did for you. You say the video for "Here's Where the Story Ends" was one of the few that sent a bolt through me and had me off to the record store the next day. From the opening strumming of the guitar throughout the monochromatic, dreamy video, I was enthralled, already knowing I would remember. Now, in another decade, century, and millennium, my memory is enhanced, like everyone else's, by YouTube. I see that Harriet Wheeler doesn't just sing about wearing cardigans on another song on Reading, Writing, and Arithmetic, but was wearing one that first time I saw her. I'm not sure I noticed that then when seeing a video was a matter of chance, but it was obvious that the band had an art school aesthetic and I had already fallen for it. It was like the band was living an alternate version of college life, one I could almost imagine. That really, for me, explained a lot about why I'm so drawn to the Sundays music.
Hmm.
Even I wasn't into it in the '90s. It's always been sort of in the background a little bit, but
Hmm.
studying it just for that episode, I'm really it connects to a lot of the things I loved in that era. In particular, that kind of romance of a certain kind of college life, and the fact that the album is called Reading, Writing, and Arithmetic. There aren't a lot of like academic bands, but they're
Almost none,
yeah, they're touching on
actually.
that. And the only other thing I would mention before I turn it back over to you is that it connected to me for a band that I love even more that I really do have a nostalgic association with is Bell and Sebastian, who is a Scottish band, sort of twee indie pop.
Very
Um,
familiar with them. Yeah.
yeah, and they've got a lot of songs that touch on that same sort of feeling of going to school at a certain moment in time, being young, and I think as you might get into here critically, not being connected to the internet really all that much, and just sort of like being alone on the campus.
Totally. Well, and I think the transformations are going to be relevant, but you're the I had a huge preamble. I'm glad we got to the point. We'll circle back to some of the preamble. Let me jump in with the Sundays for a second. And definitely I like the Bell and Sebastian, and I think the fact that I just saw that they're doing like shows playing their albums, Tiger Milk, and oh, it has the word sinister. I just blanked on it, but they're
If
doing
you're
like
feeling
30th.
sinister,
If you're
yeah.
feeling sinister, I love those. Boy with the Arab Strap and
I just saw them a couple of
Seymour
years ago.
Stein. I
Yeah,
just,
they're
oh man, I
great.
love those. But the Sundays haven't done a reunion tour. They haven't done a nostalgia tour. That's going to be pretty important here. They disappeared by choice, and that's amazing. And I hope that by the time this comes out, every time I'm writing about them, Google like, do they have it? Everyone's waiting to see if they do something, but that'll be important. But getting back to like
Harriet,
exactly
if
what
you're
you,
listening, let's get it together. Let's get it on the road.
I will 1000% be there. I was thinking, and this is probably a little bit of being a working class academic, or I called it unlikely academic, was like, why would you care what I think? Well, let me give you a couple of reasons. I saw the Sundays at the Empire Club, which I write about in September 1990, and I was not doing well at college. John Carroll University is a pretty good college if you want for a regional college, if you want to be a doctor or an accountant or a politician, but not so much if you want to be an academic and move to New York where no one heard of it. And it wasn't a great fit because I was kind of a bookworm and a little bit of a weirdo. And it's kind of a school for people who didn't get into Notre Dame. Honestly, it's like their second choice. Even our school football college, we're like, we copied Notre Dame like colors. You know what I mean? I didn't want to go to Notre Dame. I went to John Carroll for other reasons. But I went to this show with there are like a lot of nice people. I went there with a friend, which I write about. I then went to see them when their next album came out in May. I think what? Let me look at yes, March 1993. I was a senior, so the Sundays kind of bracket my college experience. And again, um, I feel like I'm going to be tangential out here today. But one of the great connections, the subtitle of the book is "Happy Connections," is getting to talk with you. I also through the internet, which turns out is not totally evil any more than streaming is. This scholar, Brett Lashwell, reached out to me. He was at University College London and said, I was just on a train commuting to London and I read your article and I'm doing research on the Sundays and there's not a lot written about them. And I loved it. Oh, and coincidentally, I'm from Northeast Ohio. And I just want to be clear, like citing my sources here, because there is a book called Behind the Moon, which kind of corroborates by Tim Blanchard. It'll probably be in the linked in the show notes. And some of the things I just had a 2 hour conversation with Brett yesterday. We're collaborating on a longer project on the Sundays, but the amazing, like mind-bending thing was he's a couple years younger than me. He went to Kent State University, which might come up again in our talk today. He's from Northeast Ohio, and he was in a band that I cannot figure out if I ever saw them called the Frans. And the song "Here's Where the Story Ends" changed his musical career, brought a new person into his band, into his family ultimately. And like he had footage of venues that I haven't seen in 30 years from his band playing there that's pre-internet, and that's part of the draw for the Sunday. So I'm like, it literally bent my mind to be at like Cedar's Bar in Youngstown, Ohio, and see his band setting up their drum kit and doing a walkthrough. It doesn't exist anymore. And it had, the tin ceilings, the pinball machine I played, the bar where I was an underage, Rolling Rock drinker is amazing. And the thing with what I wanted to bring it back to you and then get right back to the Sundays here is, Brett also did some music production. So it's really helped me to understand the band. He's a really good drummer and he did some at Kent State, worked with like a music producer. So I understand the album, like why, if you like this kind of music, not everyone does. I do. It's awesome, and part of it really is the songwriting and the production, and there's some unique qualities. But I got that from Brett, kind of a deeper dive into that.
Well,
But you're
yeah,
exactly
yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. Sort of what is it about this sound? Because that one of the reference points you make in the article is the Smiths, and it does.
totally, yeah,
I fit it into that sort of like jangly guitar,
totally, yeah.
dreamy feeling. I don't know. There's a lot going on in terms of music production, but there's also a certain kind of tone and attitude towards the world that feels like it's present there.
And I still love it to this day. I mean, it
Yeah.
amazes me that of it definitely would be on my top 10, might be my top album, the Desert Island Question. And part of it, just sticking with kind of Brett's insights, that this was an embarrassment to me. And it wasn't until I did more research that I realized, of course, Brett was right. I talk about, and I hadn't read this Tim Blanchard book when I did my article in the part of that ebook. I didn't realize the drums are programmed
Mm.
and they used live drums and overlays to make them seem natural. So, I played a little drums. I love the rhythm section. And I was like so embarrassed when Brett said, well, the drums are programmed. And I'm like, I actually did not know. I'm a huge New Order fan. Um, like, you listen to Blue Monday, you understand, boom, boom, boom. And,
Sure.
you picture I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. I share your embarrassment.
Yeah. So I was like, wow. And there's a
Because part
great
of the
podcast.
charm I feel like of this album is a kind of organic feel to it, even if it's
Totally.
even if it's got that almost Cure-ish type sound.
Right. It's a mood album.
Yeah, it feels like just a bunch of people in a room making music together.
It kind of is. So, I think I thank you for indulging my preamble. So let me get to my main point. If you quit listening right now, don't quit listening. But if you did, it's exactly what you said it is. And it's something I've spent a lot of time now thinking about for a couple years. And maybe since I first heard the album and saw them, because the best concert I ever saw was that Empire one. And it makes sense now, by the way. Here I go tangential. They played the same song twice. They
Mm.
opened with Can't Be Sure, which was their first. I did not know that was their first single. And in the UK, because Rough Trade kind of went out of business, they never released Here's Where the Story Ends as a single in the UK. So that was the big MTV. Probably come back to 120 minutes here, 120 months, 120 minutes. But I now realize, so at the end of their encore, they came back out at the Empire Club in Cleveland, and Harriet Wheeler said something like, "You guys are so fucking awesome. This has been amazing." I was literally mesmerized. And when I say literally mesmerized, like when I was a freshman in high school, we had musicals, and the senior girls in the musical mesmerized me. There's only two times in my life, like, like I'm a 14-year-old boy looking at a senior girl singing a beautiful song, and Harriet Wheeler at the Empire Club. But what I realized, getting back to Brett and the production, and then to the main lodestone here, why it's important, they didn't know a lot of songs because they had hung out in a room practicing them. And there's a really good podcast, which I only recently learned about, with the drummer, Pat Hannon. he had to learn to play like a different way to match the programming. So basically, the band, and I think this lends a lot of mystique. We can go back to Bell and Sebastian. They have a little bit of mystique, but they've kind of expanded beyond their mystique. It was basically David and Gavin and Harriet Wheeler were the band.
Hmm.
They're a couple,
Hmm.
and they've been together since 1983. They're, as far as we know, they're married to this day with two children. We don't know a lot about them. They like it that way. And they brought in these really charming. I love the podcast with the drummer because he's like, I had to learn to play like the machine, to play. So when you see live, but when I saw them in Cleveland, they didn't know any other songs. They didn't do cover bands. They were two people who were college students who, being in the UK, bucked, and the Blanchard book talks about they bucked the like be an 80s overachiever and just went right on the dole and hung out writing these songs together for years as college students. And I, as an English major, let me point out she's an English major and he was a Romance language. So these are like humanities type people thinking about the world that they see through the lens of being a college student and really, and I should say you guys were brilliant in the sense that rereading this, the album was supposed to come out in 89, but being on an indie label, they couldn't coordinate all the release dates. So it's kind of a perfect bridge with 1990. And I think I kind of hinted at here why I feel like a good person to write about this, seeing them in my beginning of my sophomore year and the end of my senior year. They are the consummate college album for that time in college radio. The other
Hmm.
book I'm reading, Live from the Underground, A History of College Radio by Catherine Rye Jewell. It's on UNC Press. I think your
Yeah.
book's on. It's a nice
Yep.
press,
I
good
think
book.
I've been emailing with her. I think we may
It's
have
a
her
good
on the
book.
show. Yeah.
I
Uh-huh.
will be on there for sure. I'll be watching that for sure or listening. So the thing is like what we were talking about earlier, being a little depressed and like opening up my Chronicle and Inside Higher Ed this morning, seeing University of Chicago suspended all English PhD and Comp Lit. This is an album by an English major and a Comp Lit major at about a time when college meant hanging out. That's why I was kind of mentioning my other projects, not to just dilly dally, but I think for me, from my perspective on what education is as an unlikely academic, it's about integrating experience and figuring things out. And it's a very tough thing to defend as a budget item. And I've been reading a lot about the history of universities. And university is a word that means nothing. It could be Queensborough Community College, it could be the Graduate Center, it could be research. And I remember when I was fortunate that my dissertation turned into a book on Routledge, like reading things from the New York Public Library, and the books came out with dust on them, and like you
Mm-hmm.
realize like no one cares about the minor works of Sherwood Anderson or the first biography of Zora Neale Hurston, but I do, and like 10 people do. And what we're doing is like I almost pictured like the hive mind activating, like I'm remembering something that most people forgot.
Yeah.
And maybe it will be valuable, maybe not. And the thing with this album, it's saturated with time. And uh, I had some funny buzzwords here. One I want to say is time isn't what it used to be, and to
Mm-hmm.
me, I'm a
Mm-hmm.
scholar by training of American modernism. I was fascinated by those books about how the railroads invented time zones and, Paul Fussell, The Great War and Modern Memory. And like,
Totally.
nobody wore a watch because who the hell cared? And no one cared. Farmers don't care if it's 9 a.m. or 3 p.m. It's factory workers and stock markets and railroads. And I kind of have the analogy. Tell me if I get too Grandpa Simpson here. We could definitely talk about the Simpsons at some point, but like I used to laugh when my grandma would say trousers or icebox, but I still talk about taping things from TV. But I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
I have YouTube TV. I'm pressing like add to library or DVRing something. I didn't know that we would live through a transformation in the way that people relate to each other and understand time and space. Like literally, we don't understand what's going on right now because it's so disorienting.
I don't know.
And
I don't know who anticipated that, and now it just seems so obvious that when you listen to the world that's conjured up in the lyrics and the sound of this album, the
right,
Sundays, it feels like it is a lost world in some ways,
it's a lost world.
and that is encapsulated in the university experience, but it's not unique to universities. I think it's something we all feel in one way or the other. The feeling that there was things went by in a slower way. The day had more of a feeling of a wandering to it. And that goes back to all the way to your 19th century analogy about the railroads and the feeling that like, yeah, we
Correct.
somehow got put into these boxes. And you think about like what devalued the college experience in the larger popular mainstream. What made people look at college as something that you don't need anymore? Part of it is because college, whatever college became, we can talk about the neoliberal university, but it became a more corporatized, business-like place where the expectation was production of jobs and production of something that made sense in a capitalist framework. And that's not what the value of education was to me ever, and it certainly wasn't the romance that I had with those lazy days in the 90s. I mean, the day, honestly, the day that a single day pops into my mind when I listen to this album, and is the day I got really into reading Paul Auster novels, and I had an old vintage brown suit, and it was way too warm in Southern California to wear this suit, but I wanted to wear it because I liked the whole sort of like New York aesthetic that was in these novels. And I went to a coffee house wearing that suit in Isla Vista, California, just outside the university at UC Santa Barbara. And I spent all day smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, reading that book, and then at some point wandered onto the campus and probably saw a movie at some point at one of the university theaters. And just feels like that day captures a lot to me of what is lost. Not that you can't do that today, but it feels like that that nostalgia trap to plug my own sort of idea from the other
Hmm.
podcast. What I think about with the nostalgia trap is how, you spoke of micro generations, how entangled it is that our youth is also the time where it was the last analog moment, the last moment where we were pre-internet. And how hard it is to sort of disentangle that when we're thinking about how much we appreciated our youth and how lucky we were to be part of that moment because it just feels like
Well,
kids these days to do the Grandpa Simpson thing with their phones on campus are not really in the moment in the same way we were.
you said it beautifully. That's and not getting back to me, but getting back to the Sundays, they capture that feeling. They have
Totally.
songs where they're like, it's that little souvenir of a terrible year. It's my finest hour. It's spending it's okay to spend Sunday, Monday to, what was it, Sunday, Monday to Saturday in bed. It's that feeling of time moving. And, you know, it blows my mind that I was trained to read books. And what you're describing, nobody, I mean, novels. Let me be clear. Like, that's what I'm trying. Who cares? Like, I'm shocked. And like, I feel sometimes like I want to get down and kiss the ground that I have a job, where I'm paid to like, based on this training and being a writer. And I started my grad school at Ohio State. And when they had an oral exam for to get your master's degree, I did exactly what you're talking about. I rotated coffee shops and I would read it for 8 and 10 hour stretches. And one of the few things I definitely learned in the 90s that applies to exactly what you're saying was everyone, like someone, I went to a talk by Professor Wayne Cosmore. He said, Foucault's the air we breathe. We don't need to cite him. Well, one of the things with Foucault was you don't know what a category is until it's over. And
Yeah.
the exception proves the norm. And obviously the big one, I'm not going to give you a history of sexuality here, but what's that Oscar Wilde guy doing? I don't know, but it's more than sodomy. It's like a lifestyle. Oh, he's a homosexual. What are you? I guess I'm a heterosexual. So the idea that heterosexual was invented after homosexual
Right.
because
Right.
they needed they invented the thing that they were pathologizing. So you needed a thing that was the normie. Well, what you're describing, to take it back to the Sundays, if I, let's say I was 5 years younger, we're hanging out, and you wouldn't come to me and say, I just had my in-person class. It's great to see you IRL. Every class was in person.
Right.
You
Right.
hung out with your friends in real life. I mean, I often have these like funny things. You could do like a Wall Street Journal article where like I have like a grad student who was like doing some job and they're like, let's check in. It's like to renew your job. So I said, okay, I'm in the office these days. Like, oh, I met on Zoom. And I
Right.
was like, oh
Right.
my God, like you're trying to keep your job. And I'll talk to like the assistant who's younger. It's like, no, it's not you. Like that's just the assumption. But so my main point is, David, and this is pretty depressing. For the rest of my life and your life, unless there's like a solar flare or a nuclear war, you're either looking at your phone or you're not looking at your phone.
Yeah.
So if I were to do what you said, I could do it, but I would not be looking at my phone. And I know I mentioned this last time we talked. Like one of the reasons I think podcasts are so popular is like we're on Zoom, but we're like looking at each other. My phone's off. Your
Yeah.
phone's off.
Right.
This is as close as it would be to like if we went to college together and we had a few beers or whatever we're doing, smoking, drinking, whatever. We're hanging out, talking about stuff. That's what college was. That wasn't like, oh, we carved out a space where we weren't looking at our phone. There were no phones. And it's just something you can't go back to. And to me, the happy part was kind of what I mentioned earlier, connecting with Brett, connecting with you, getting to know Justin better through this. So like the amazing thing with music was, and we could go off on random anecdotes. I have a few, Toad the Wet Sprocket and the Sunday Spike by
There,
Elvis
you know,
Costello.
the Toad the Wet Sprocket videos for Pale, which we talked about in the January 1990 episode as well. They also have that dreamy black and white aesthetic. I think it was something that a lot of bands were doing at that moment, and
Yeah.
yeah, they look like the Sundays videos.
Maybe we'll come back to that one because I don't want to get too tangential unless you want to. But the point, maybe we will in a second. But like the point is like I think the thing that makes me happy about music is it's still harder. Like we're never going to say, like I heard you talking about buying vinyl. I'm in a co-op building here. Someone's pounding a nail. It's a little annoying. I can't have like a hi-fi set, because I'm surrounded by old people. They would call the president of the building in 10 seconds. So, I can jam out in the car basically.
Yeah,
Streaming's not a terrible thing. That's pretty amazing at times. My good headphones, my hearing could be better, so they're really awesome. But like when you buy vinyl, it's a choice. You're not going to do away with streaming. Acoustically, and I actually pay for Apple and Spotify. It's a little indulgence. I feel like I'm helping the bands, but also Apple has much better quality.
that's
So I kind of
true.
do
Yeah, I've noticed
Spotify in
that.
the car and Apple when I'm home with my good headphones. But it's just like you can't undo it, and I think part of the magic also, this is a key word I've been talking about, necessity and perspective. You can't make up necessity.
Mm.
It exists or it doesn't exist.
Mm.
So for me to see that Sundays video, we could use the word disdain here in a second because I remember this. Like 120 minutes had a big connection with the Sundays being so popular in the United States. That's where I saw them. So when I was this point in my life, I had a friend, John, and his older brother had been a DJ at Kent State University. I mentioned in the piece. He would like make fun of my music taste and then tell me what was really cool. And then I would stay up to watch 120 minutes every Sunday. And then I didn't like country, so it's pretty much classic rock. Our local college radio had a jazz show I listened to late at night, but otherwise it's NPR. And that was pretty much it. Pop radio,
Yeah, yeah.
So like,
MTV,
um,
so influential. It's hard to overstate how much MTV was the space where I learned what was cool. But I think I mentioned this in the first episode. VH1 was also that space for me too, which is weirdly enough because VH1 was, I think, pitched to a little bit older crowd. It was more, I always say it's the music that you heard at the dentist office, the kind of like the Phil
mhm.
Collins stuff, the Wilson Phillips. I don't know how much Wilson Phillips was on
I remember.
MTV.
Well,
But stuff like that, and weirdly enough, that stuff is part of my cultural DNA too, whether I like it or not.
Well, I think, yeah, I think so. The other thing I was thinking, like listening to your podcast, and by the way, you and John have a great rapport. He's an awesome resource. It's amazing his memory and his connections. It's really adds a lot. Um, but I was thinking because like every trend, I saw a couple comments like on YouTube, like every trend has exceptions, and we're academics. So if you're an English major, it's like, is it the Victorian age or the long 19th century, or like, oh, that's how we debate things where, oh, the 60s really started with, the 1953 publication. So there's always exceptions. But one of the amazing things that also makes the Sunday so important was one, the connection with the 120 minutes here in the US, but also the transformation. And John already talked about this, but college radio became radio,
Right,
and
right.
Cleveland, there was a station 107.9, The End, that literally switched from like classic rock to indie alternative rock while I was in college. So like I found my way to the oddballs through the college radio station, but at the end, something like Nirvana or I think it was Stereo MCs. I just remember always hearing my people in the dorm playing Get Yourself Connected. It was that kind of alternative music that was sort of like, Depeche Mode Violator songs and things like that would be on this mainstream radio. But for me, it actually started a little earlier. Um, I don't know if I want to talk about micro generations, but I was thinking about what you guys were talking about, like this transition that I think the Sundays came out of that 80s music of being sincere, of being
Hmm.
very influenced by the Smiths. It's interesting that there's a guy, Ray Schulman, who produced both My Bloody Valentine and the Sundays, and that's part of I think the perfectionist of their production value, which even though it does have a jangly guitar and a shimmering guitar, it's very much like the Smiths. There's a kind of like uh, it just holds up really well, particularly the first album, the production, and I think it's
Yeah.
interesting that like a band that's based on a couple, because My Bloody Valentine's also a couple, wanted to present themselves as a four-piece band. And I think it really was kind of like the Beatles and Stones to the Smiths that, we all know it's Johnny Marr and
Right.
Morrissey, but
Right.
you need a four-piece band. But for me personally, that switch was really through U2. Like I
Mm.
remember being in a car and Hot FM 101 and Youngstown played With or Without You. And I was like, what the hell? It'd be like if I turned on Colbert tonight and like you were the guest. I'd be like, I know that guy. I
Isn't
just
that
talked to him.
amazing? That's such a, I think people, younger people today, but especially be like, wait, you too was like the underground hip thing for you to
Right.
hear on me. But yeah, I think it's really important to point out, and I think it connects to the Sundays in college so much that underground radio, and the underground sort of college radio thing becomes the mainstream. And as John is always kind of doing his old man routine about on the show, it could sort of washes out a lot of that what was interesting and subversive and cool about that stuff. But the fact that college itself was a place where the mainstream was looking for like what is hip and what is cool. I don't know if that
100%.
really exists anymore. I mean, my wife Claudia has a really funny story about being on MTV in the 90s when she was at Brooklyn College. MTV came to Brooklyn College and was interviewing people about what music they were listening to, and she was on one of those like quick segments where they were just she said they
Wow.
were they were showing her shoes, they were showing her fashion, and they were really kind of doing all these close-ups on all the little like her tote bag and all the things she had. And it was partly it seemed like they were sort of trying to absorb like going to college, like what is cool, what are these kids listening to? And it just feels like that moment is just not there, especially like you mentioned the Columbia students and the rants we've done on the other podcast about the politics going on. But like it does feel like the mainstream, whatever that might be, if that even exists anymore, doesn't look to the college kids for what's cool anymore. And that was a particular moment.
No, I'm a very angry Gen X member. Um, I've been putting out feelers. I'm trying to reach out to Gen Z and saying like, we'll take care of the boomers if you guys take out the millennials, because I feel like we're overshadowed. But it's you're totally right. And I mean, one of my claims to fame, such as it is, I was more a witness than a participant. I went to like the first Lollapalooza concert, it was a touring thing. I saw in the Blossom Center. It's a little weird to see Susie and the Banshees and like Nine Inch Nails in the daytime and like
Yeah.
an Ohio field, but it was still pretty cool. But you're totally right. And I mean, that was really weird. Like, I mean, I benefited that because I think I mentioned this, but I was a college music DJ, WJC 88.5. I think it's JCU, which makes more sense, John Carroll University. But, we were a CMJ contributor. So we had like certain rules, like you have to play two, I don't remember actually the exact number, but we had like a new music bin and we had to log our songs and those were compiled as part of the thing. So we got comped a lot of free. We didn't get paid. It was a volunteer job. I still have my FCC license, probably at my parents' house, but you got comped for a lot of things. That's where the music producers, that's where MTV was looking for. And again, one other thing I think that's good now, because as you're saying that, it also fed into a lot of tribalism and disdain. So you got your hip hop show, you got your MTV on spring break, the total frat thing. It totally fed into like the balkanization of like genres and
Headbangers Ball.
Headbangers Ball. I'm blanking on the hip hop show that they finally added,
Yo
but
MTV
Yo
Raps.
MTV Raps. You had the call-in show. You had MTV Spring Break, so it could be more frat than like, Jello shots. And I do remember that Radiohead performed Creep at the Spring Break, so they sometimes would have a mix and match of
I've
like,
seen that video. That's another bizarre, like, this is happening in the daytime while people are like lounging in a
yeah.
pool and throwing a beach ball. There's Tom York singing Creep. It just doesn't fit, but somehow that was the weird moment that existed in the early 90s
Well, and this is
and
how
mid
my
90s.
memories
Yeah.
on one of my headings was my memory on mu or your brain on music. I remember you were supposed to listen to what you played, but of course, do students always do their homework, Professor Parsons? No, we do not. So I just looked at like, oh, Radiohead Creep. I listened to a couple bars, sounds cool. I put it on my show. I didn't put the radio edit show on, and they have the F-bomb in there. I literally thought like I don't know how many people listen to my show, but I thought they were going to ban me from radio because the original version.
That's right.
He's an effing creep. Um,
Radio was so censored. I mean, you remember like the Tom Petty song, like "Let's get to the point, let's smoke another Chiao." It was always like I was like I assume he's saying joint there.
I
It's so clear, and yet it was never on the radio.
One of my fun things to do, and we can probably turn the conversation other direction here, but when I was manning the board, I was a big Pogues fan, and I wasn't a purist. So when the Hell's Ditch album came out, I was really excited about it. But I think it's the song Sayonara, they said motherfucker kiss the ground, and I always like to fade it out. Made me feel
Sure.
like I was
Yeah.
like knew how to run the board correctly, which I kind of did. I could do that. I could fade it out with the F word came up. But I think one of the things, so that was really weird, but kind of getting back to necessity. Tell me if I'm being too indulgent here, but I was thinking my first concert was U2, and I went to Ursuline High School, the Fighting Irish. So, another sidebar. Ed O'Neill went there. Like your friend John Lombardo, let me just take one quick step back. I literally remember I watched tons of TV in the 70s or 80s. So if you want to make anything from Hogan's Heroes to Different Strokes to Three's Company, I'm with you. I I consciously, and this is something you can't do today, kind of getting back to the time frame with the Sundays. I remember being in high school and like being so bored in a math class, and I'm looking out, we're in the old building, like the radiators are drying out your eyeballs. It was in California, Youngstown. And I had the song Like the Weather by 10,000 Maniacs in my head, like just playing in my head to like, because it's like a crappy winter day. And I could just like, it looked like a black and white video. The only light in the world was the green, yellow, red of the street light and whatever my geometry teacher was droning away. And around that time, I heard or read, I don't remember, Natalie Merchant saying, oh, my parents didn't let me watch TV. I've never watched TV. Oh my God, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize that. So I almost watched no TV in the 90s. When I was a grad student, I didn't have cable TV till 2005. And when I was a grad student at John Carroll, first of all, we had the cool radio people had a Simpsons party every week. So the only TV I watched were The Simpsons.
I've heard this so much from people over the years.
John said that, and I
Yeah.
was like,
You,
wow, he's a cool musician. That's what I was doing. I did watch football when I was at Ohio State. I put my TV in the closet. I had like a 16-inch color TV. I took it out during the weekend. I think at that point, the Sunday Simpsons had gone from Thursday back to Sunday. So I literally only took my TV out on Saturday and Sunday and put it in a closet and didn't watch TV. So to this day, I've only seen one episode of Seinfeld and one episode of Friends. I did not watch
amazing.
TV in the 90s.
It's funny because I think the story I hear for the most from like hip punk people of your micro generation is it was The Simpsons and it was Twin Peaks. It's like the only show we were watching.
Yeah, and later at Ohio State, people had this was like 94 to 96. Some of the cool people had X-Files episodes, like parties.
That's really interesting that there was a sort of like TV was considered a kind of cultural wasteland by people who were like hip and arty, but
Yeah,
but music had something else going on. Like you could find music that was and even on college radio and eventually into the mainstream, there was something hip and arty going on. I mean, we just listened to Primus, for the February
yeah,
episode, and I'm like, how is a band like this getting play on MTV? They're so weird. They're so like, I mean, they're really out there in their sort of attitudes and aesthetic, and yet there they are alongside, all the other bands that are
yeah.
there. And it feels like TV was behind the eight ball in terms of producing content that satisfied that hip crowd.
Yeah, and I still was watching 120 minutes, I should say. I wasn't quite 100, but yeah, I think Well, I think one of the things that tell me, I don't know if this is where you're going with that, but one of the things I was thinking about was like not replaying like what's progressive versus alternative versus indie. But I think one of the things that this created this alternative space, if you weren't watching TV and you didn't have a phone, was you participated. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of jealous because I live in Bayside, Queens. It's a nice neighborhood out closer to Long Island. I don't have like live music venues near me, and so I barely see shows because it's a
Mm.
production to go to the city or to Brooklyn.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've heard you
Claudia and
talk
I
about.
talk about that all the time. We lived in New York, we lived in Brooklyn for years and years, and we're like, we never saw shows very often when we were there. And we live in California now, and especially post-pandemic, we've, discovered a few local venues here. We're seeing Modest Mouse and Flaming Lips
Oh
in
wow,
a couple weeks at the Santa Barbara Bowl. But we have seen so much live music here, including a jazz club that's like a block away. That's live
that's what I
jazz
was
every
thinking of.
night.
Every
Yeah.
time you say that, I'm jealous because I when I lived in and I again kind of talking about me, but getting maybe towards a concept here of like indie music.
Yeah.
I always had a difference between live bands and recorded music. So like I saw a lot of punk and kind of like replacement style garage type punk bands, including the replacements, but I didn't always listen. Like I like good produced music. I always kind of called it like Eurotrash versus lo-fi, and I kind of like I can handle lo-fi that's recorded in an interesting way, but I don't listen to a lot of punk music like in my house or in my head. But I used to go to tons of shows, and that really got me through when I lived in Youngstown, Cleveland, and Columbus, Ohio. I saw tons of music that I didn't necessarily own the records or listen to a lot. Sometimes my friends had the records. But I remember the second show I went to was my friend John, his brother was at Kent State, and he was gone, but he still knew what was going on. He said, "Oh, this band, The Alarm, is playing." And my first concert was the Joshua Tree tour with U2.
Wow.
That was like the coolest I ever felt in my life. I mean, just I was going to say this earlier, and I mentioned my high school because we weren't it was a Catholic school. We were allowed to wear like concert T-shirts, so it's Irish. So like U2 is the coolest alternative band. The really cool kids like REM and like Joy Division and stuff, but like the pretty cool kids like U2. So that's me. I did kind of like REM and Joy Division, but I was pretty excited to go. Of course, my friend Kevin's mom drove us. I was 17. I had my license yet. So that's pretty cool. No, it wasn't super cool, but I just remember sitting there. I have a mullet. I have a swatch on. I'm wearing polo cologne and I have my white t-shirt my white school shirt tucked in really tight so you could see my concert t-shirt. That was the coolest I ever felt in my life. It was the least cool I probably ever was, but it was like the most cool I ever felt in my
That's such
life.
a great memory, though. My older brother and his girlfriend were super into Joshua Tree, and I was really young, but I remember that being a first sort of like marker for me of like what
Hmm.
cool was that they because U2 wasn't really. Yeah, I don't think I got any exposure to U2 except through them listening to it in the car and like having the tape.
Hmm.
And it wasn't as I remember, you two got more of a presence, obviously, in the culture, and eventually they're on the radio all the time. But when the Joshua Tree came out, I think it's easy to forget how sort of alternative they truly were.
Yeah, and I want to get back to the Sundays, but just to trace the U2 and the indie music scene
Yeah.
that the Sundays fit into. When I was in fifth grade, same friend John, I'll tell you what I liked right now, David. I was listening to the Jay Giles band, Freeze Frame and
Yeah.
like Love Stinks. By the way, you could be big on MTV by just having a drummer play two frozen fish. Check out the Love Stinks videos. See, um, and I remember this because of course, Catholic school also, you can't sing Angel is a Centerfold in front of nuns. That will get you detention. So we had a lecture on why, that was either detention or hell or both. And I liked Hall and Oates. And I remember there was this kid, Bill, who was like a shoplifter and he needed friends. So one day he just like gave me, I don't want to claim I accepted stolen property. I don't know that he shoplifted. And he's like, hey, I got you the Private Eyes single. Like, thanks, man. Cool. My cool friends made so much fun of me. They were into deep tracks on MTV, and I had
Right.
just gotten
Right.
cable. Adam Ant. I actually would rather listen to Hall and Oates than Adam Ant, but
Me
Adam Ant was
too.
like,
100%. Not even a dude, not that's not even a question. I love Hall and Oates. They've got a cool sound, man. And I think they had a little
yeah,
bit of a
they got.
renaissance a few years ago too.
I'm glad they're still looking into. I think they just sued each other, but they both look and sound pretty good.
I was at an
But
Animal Collective show in Brooklyn with all the hip kids in the 2000s, in 2010s probably, and they were playing Hall and Oates before the show started, before the Animal Collective came out, and everyone was super into it. And I
yeah,
was just like, yeah, they're cool. They got a cool groove
after we get off, I might listen to Private Eyes to honor
for
Bill's
sure. Yeah.
But my other friends were making fun of me because they're like, U2's what's cool. And I realized because I remember Adam Clayton, that Orange Hair, I think it was the song Gloria got some airplay. And then a little bit later, Sunday Bloody Sunday was always on. And that's where I grew my mullet because I would just see Bono with like a white flag and Red Rocks concert.
They have an energy at that point too. There are some clips on YouTube, speaking of streaming culture, that show, U2 concerts in the mid 80s with even like in LA, and God, they were really hitting it hard. Like they were just a really energetic, incredible band.
Yeah.
And
And I didn't
yeah.
realize till I did some research on this, explained like Simon Reynolds' book, they wanted to be Joy Division. So they wanted to be like, and like literally Bono and them went to Manchester and met with Martin Ham. I didn't realize like if you listen to Boy and all these weird breaking glass and they were literally wanting to be like punk to the mainstream, which they kind of did there for a while. But to
Yeah.
kind of short circuit the U2, because I know you mentioned Zooropa. So to me, when Acton Baby came out, I'm like, this sounds like Jane's Addiction. I don't know why the cover that did influence my life because I set a goal, which I later accomplished, of driving in a Trabant when I lived in Prague. Because remember the one video had all these little commie cars. But the last time I really cared about U2 is I waited in line at midnight at Oasis Records. I know this because I still have the boxer shorts you gave to be one of the first 100 people to buy Zooropa.
Oh, wow.
And I felt so old. I was 22. I was the oldest person there. You know, when you
Yeah.
graduate college, you go through this. Get back to the Sundays here. But the point being is like there was something there about the earnestness to the way up to that point. I think that was the last relevant thing they did. I love, and you mentioned this, so I wanted to pick up on this, was just the songs Europa and Lemon are two of my favorite U2 songs because
Oh,
they captured
absolutely.
this feeling of like, I know I'm being ironic, but that's all there is. And the way they incorporated Brian Eno as they did on that kind of one-off Passengers album, like he's part of the band. Like it's kind of like we're not just expressing our feelings, like we're expressing our feelings through technology and the producer and the marketplace. I find it really poignant.
Lemon might be my absolute favorite U2 song, in part because nothing else really sounds like it in their catalog. They're doing, there's like the lyrics are very postmodern, and the lyrics are very
Yeah,
like playing with like a man makes a picture, a moving picture,
yeah.
all of
Midnight
that
is where
stuff.
the day begins. Yeah,
Yeah, there's, and the sound of it too, as it's a really kind of creepy and haunting song and haunting melody
totally.
and production. I love Lemon so much.
And
One of
it
my
kind of is
favorites.
like if they wanted to be Joy Division, it's kind of like late Joy Division, early New Order,
Yeah.
because the first, my friend John gave me New Order, that Substance on tape when it first came out. I'm making minimum wage here at the cemetery, 335. To buy a double album, you have to love it. Because I mean, I would literally go in and like a regular CD and be like, oh my God, this is 5 hours of working doing manual labor. Like, how much do I want this CD?
I'm trading 5 hours of hell for this. Yeah.
But I love that, like Substance. There's a certain like I remember listening and going to John going like it's like disco suicide, and I didn't even know the
Yeah.
connection to Ian Curtis and Joy Division. You could kind of hear this like you want to dance, and that's what Lemon is like, kind of their like New Order song that's sort of
Totally.
like energy. But
And
real
and
quickly,
that
Nick,
Johnny Cash song at the end of Zooropa too is just
cool,
puts it
that's
out,
awesome.
and it's such a scary, weird song. I love it.
It's creepy, and I'm with you. And then to kind of get back to the Sunday, so the
Yeah.
second concert I see is the Alarm. I want to give a plug here because Mike Peters, their lead singer, died recently of cancer, and I love that album. And I think they had toured with U2 on the War tour. I didn't see that tour, but they were kind of like this song, "Eye of the Hurricane." I highly recommend. I think they reordered the songs for streaming. I have the CD, but I saw them at Kent State, and they came. And this, I'm about to have a payoff here. They came on stage. They played their great song, "I Rain in the Summertime." Great guitar hook. And then Mike Peters, the lead singer, said, we're so happy this album is really doing well. I'm going to be honest, we could have played a much bigger venue than this theater at Kent State, but you guys were there for us when our last tour, when nobody heard of us, and you helped us get a start here in the States, and we wanted to give this show to you. I didn't see the first show. I'm benefiting from that. And to me, getting back to the Sundays, the thing that was different was how music was mediated through print media, through like 120 minutes was sort of this weird way to connect the whole country where you could be out in the hinterlands or not have a cool station or a college station and connect. But there is that sense, like when Mike Peters said that, like where they needed us and now they're giving something to us. It
Mm.
wasn't, there's a sense of participation. Of course, I got that as a college radio DJ because I would get comped on tickets and sometimes you had to interview the band or you had to play a certain number of new songs. But the thing with the Sundays is they just really exist at this crossroads of the indie aesthetic, the do-it-yourself, and reading this Blanchard book's very good about kind of the production. Like they purposely went with rough trade. They purposely did not want to sell a lot of singles. They didn't want to sell a lot, partially because like the Kurt Cobain, they didn't want fame, but when they did Can't Be Sure as a single, they hadn't finished the album. And they didn't, as I saw when I saw them in Cleveland, they didn't know a lot of songs. Like they didn't want to be thrust into the spotlight. They wanted to work with Rough Trade Records
Mm.
and do everything on their
Yeah.
own
Right.
terms. And now bands, the difference, because when we're talking about micro generations and my little Gen X comment there, we're living in a gerontocracy. If you talked about this on one of the news traps, if you have a 401k and the stock market goes up 20% for 2 years and 10% this year, and you'd saved your $1 million, you now have $2 million. You're like, I'm retired. Screw it.
Right.
I've had people tell me, man, you're 54. I feel bad for you because I'm retiring early. I don't know if our university is going to make it till you get to Social Security. I
Right.
don't know that
Right.
this, and I have health insurance and job. I mean, I'm sitting there, well, how would I get health insurance? I don't even know. But I'm also advising students where, and this is kind of the dark side of nostalgia, and you've talked about this in other venues. Like, I think part of the reason when I look on Reddit, there are a lot of fans of the Sundays, and I do think it's that perfectionist music, that organic voice with this guy who put so much time. The guitar player really did all the writing and the drumming and everything. It's like sounds organic, but it's also really coolly produced. But honestly, I understand why young people are nostalgic for the 90s because a lot of ways it was demonstrably better.
100%.
Hang it.
I don't think that's a question anymore. And when I started Nostalgia Trap 10 years ago, my idea of the trap was that, well, everyone who's older always says
Everyone.
everything was better when they were younger. But I think we're almost reaching some sort of cultural consensus, where we're looking at the 90s and we're saying that was the last moment that a certain kind of culture existed, and it was better. And it's not just culture, but a political economy. And to connect that to college and the Sundays and the sort of romance we have with college. I'm glad you mentioned the whole working class academic thing because I'm that way too. I was not bred by people who went to PhD programs at all. I mean, my family's all working people, and it was a weird thing for me to go to graduate school or even honestly a 4-year university.
Hmm.
But watching the decline of the university as a space, and watching the budget cuts that are happening is really gruesome in part because it's putting a nail in that idea, or in the coffin of that idea that the university can be a machine for providing a kind of economic security for a different kind of life. And I always was able to access money, student loans, jobs, a kind of world where I could survive and not have to work those sort of humiliating spaces that I didn't want to go to. And it feels like that's less and less available to people who don't have a
100%.
lot of money. And I do feel like we'll probably see the university continue to be sort of concentrated as an elite experience. And it's almost like we lived through this peak moment where college was, because I mean it didn't last long. You mentioned Kent State. Kent State was a place. I mean, this is part of what happened with the Kent State shootings in 1970.
Yeah. I
Was
just
sort of
watched the Devo documentary, by the way.
right. Was the
Yeah.
fact that university system in Ohio was a very, working class state traditionally, expanded dramatically in the 60s and into the 70s, and it feels like that is all retracting now. And there's something really, really depressing about that for sure.
There totally is. And this Blanchard book just puts it in the UK context. And, Harriet and David are met at University of Bristol and they
Yeah.
stayed there. he kind of doxes their kids, which they're adults, but it's a little weird. But he mentions they both went there and they both are academics, both of their children also. So,
Right.
you could kind of surmise. I couldn't agree more with you. And, that's when I was talking to Brett yesterday, he was telling me when he was at Kent State, he didn't work in the summers. And he said, I could live on $5 a day, couch surfing and making music and drink a cup of coffee and get a free refill and read a book. And I was happy. And I did the opposite. I worked full time at the cemetery, but I didn't work during the school year. And I would play basketball. Kind of like my normie friends were from the basketball team and people who studied abroad. You would just talk to people. And it was, I have to say, one of the few things that I feel like I was smart about was I thought this is such a great privilege. And I can tell you, like, exactly what you're saying. As an American Studies scholar, we've been suspecting that Cold War was the exception, that they cared about investing in universities. And of course, containment is the strategy, not radical change. But you and I and our whole generation who were able to live in a dorm or go to a 4-year school, we benefited from that and the chance to hang out. And I think to kind of maybe circle back a little to the technology, serendipity, boredom, contemplation.
Yeah.
I don't want to say slackerism. Let's call it anti-consumerism, turning off your TV. These are all like real possibilities for someone with limited funds. Just like Brett's saying, you can live on $5. I could I could go to see great bands and spend $5 and feel like I'm living and I'm talking to people.
Mm,
And the
hmm.
thing that I kind of see is like a metaphor. I'm not alone in this, but it's such a monoculture in as a gerontocracy. It feels old because old people are running things.
Right.
They got the benefits of the American exceptionalism, and they're saying that's all there is.
Uh.
But
It's
to
funny because
see,
it reminds me of that Portlandia sketch where they sort of create the idea. It's like the dream of the '90s. I think Justin actually talks about it,
oh yeah, 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 yeah,
and
yeah.
Justin has a lot of
In his
critique of
article,
that.
Justin's very good article in the book. He does. And by the way, since 2005, I've watched tons of TV. So I've only seen one episode of Seinfeld, but I've seen every episode of Portlandia at least
Yeah, and
once.
and the vision that they create that they're sort of making fun of is that like oh, in Portland in the '90s you could like work at a coffee shop for a couple of
Yeah,
hours, a week, and like live on people's couches and stuff like that. And it's a joke on the show, but it's I think it's a really felt sort of loss for younger people today that life was affordable, and not just that it was affordable, but that there was space. There was a sort of space to just do nothing, and that part of it I think is it's weird because um, we should we went through this pandemic moment just a few years ago where we were sort of like unplugged from the sort of workaday life and office work went away and that sort of thing. But it didn't seem to really, maybe it's because the phones were present. It didn't seem to really replicate or bring us back to that
no.
90s slacker thing.
Well, and that's why I think the word necessity, because we weren't being brave to turn off. There were no phones. So I was going to say,
Right.
like, I remember, and maybe we'll stick a bit more into the Sundays here. I could go through 5 or 6 songs that I saw in 120 minutes that I went the next day and bought the CD. And like you read that paragraph, I obviously worked a lot on that paragraph because it sounded pretty good, if I do say so
Yeah,
myself. I don't
look,
know if I'm quite that eloquent.
I don't mean to embarrass you. You're a great writer, David, and
I don't
that
know if
that
I'm that
article,
eloquent.
I again want to, I'll link to it in the episode description. Everyone who has a nostalgia for the '90s should read the whole Happy Nostalgia Project, but your article in particular, is connected to the Sundays, really captured something that I was even in this hour we've talked here, I've really been unable to articulate quite as clearly as you do in that article, like why the Sundays matter and why they are a singular thing in capturing a particular moment and feeling in the '90s.
I think, yeah, and I know we don't have much more time. I've enjoyed this a lot. I could probably talk all day, but I think the way I found the Sundays was important because to watch without YouTube, to watch videos randomly hoping to have one, to have a conversation with someone you might not know very well. It's like cross-pollinating. Sometimes you do like something. Sometimes you find out, well, I don't like that, but now I know why. I mean, this has been going on since, Chris Anderson with Wired magazine and the long tail and fragmentation of cable. But we've reached that point where like not only is there's like this monoculture of the technology that, what matters is the platform and that what fills it is content. We have this fragmentation. And I mean, I do think streaming, the fact that students and kids these days those kids, they don't care about genre as much and they will dabble in things and they're not as tribal as we were. There's a lot of healthy things to it. But the fact that by necessity, you had to entertain yourself in your brain, that I'm
Mm,
sitting there
yes.
thinking like, do, 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 like I'm hearing Natalie Merchant's voice and that cool, another jangly guitar band. I found that Sundays watching 120 minutes at my friend John's house. I bought the CD. I'm listening, taped it to my Walkman. But there are so many random things that happen because of necessity, and they take time. You can't say, I could tell you, David, turn off your phone and meditate for an hour. That's not the same thing as what you described as being a student, drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes and reading books and wandering into a theater. It can't be recreated. And I think
Right.
I know we may have to wrap up pretty soon here, but to me, that's why reading, writing, arithmetic, it's a band that is saturated in this couple and these two charming, the rhythm section, Pat and Patch, the bass and drummer, saturated and hanging out in college. And there's a weird way that they're like a couple. It's not, it's like they talk about this because they weren't like total recluses. They definitely tapped into the New Order, Joy Division, Smith. I think actually the cover for Reading, Writing, Arithmetic, the same person who had done the Smiths covers of like pictures of people in monochrome did it. So it makes sense. But they weren't total recluses. When they talk about interviews, you can see a couple, they did an interview on MTV. You can see them talking. There's like not a drama of like who's my next girlfriend or boyfriend or partner. And there's this weird way where it's really about arguing with yourself. And now that I know a little bit more about their relationship with each other, about like, what are we doing? What's a good day?
Mm,
How do I feel about this year?
hmm
I don't feel like going out today. You know what? I got sick on my card on my dress. I've got a hangover. I'm just gonna have a cup of tea. I'm gonna read a book. It so captures that point, and I think the production value in Talking Bread, I understand a little more why it just sounds good, but it really bridges that. Yeah, and again, I'm not saying they were the first or only here, seeing Losing My Religion video, hearing With or Without You, all these other things we're describing. There's that piece of it. And then I'm happy if they come back, but I was able in late 1999 to spend like a month in Paris. I went to Italy between the fall and spring semester, and I was listening to Belle and Sebastian the whole time. And I literally was at the Eiffel Tower, for the millennia. Like I would hear, I'm blanking on which album it was now, but I would listen to that like Seymour Stein and The Boy with the Arab Strap. I loved that where you started earlier, Belle and Sebastian, but the Sundays disappeared. It's like they wrote their own story,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm a Mets fan, but that's a whole other story. When Belle and Sebastian came out with Dear Catastrophe Waitress, they have a song is Mike Piazza, Are You Straight or Are You Gay?
Yeah. Love
They're
that
kind of
song.
gimmicky, but they're
Yeah.
gimmicky. It's
Yeah.
like it's not that they're bad now. And I can't remember. I'm blanking a little bit. I know they had a band. The female one of the female band members left. I think she worked with someone crazy like the Screaming Trees guys or something. She started a collaboration, but she left. They became a little different band. Well, that's why there is something about the 27 Club and about. I'm glad the Sundays have a couple. Have kids that are living. There is something about leaving a legacy where if you live long enough you're not the same.
Right.
It's not on
Right.
a shelf. And like for Bell and Smash, I would go see that. I would probably go see that 30th anniversary. That is a nostalgia trap, to see them perform the whole album.
Well,
But
just
I think that's
a couple things I wanted to mention
yeah,
about Belle
good.
and Sebastian while we're on the subject is I went and saw them at a show out in the middle of the desert out near Joshua Tree. Speaking of you too,
Hmm.
and it was just a little tiny show at a place called Pappy and Harriet's. It's a sort of well-known weird venue out in the middle of nowhere. And later on, maybe a week later, I saw a Facebook thread where people were talking about that show, and I realized that there were a ton of people from like the Graduate Center and the sort of academic world that I was a part of that had also been at that show. We all somehow
Well,
found ourselves at the Bell and Sebastian show, and I can't help but thinking that we're all listening to that in part because we attach a certain kind of romance to the academic world, and there's not a lot of bands that capture that both in their sound and in their lyrics. There's a song of theirs that they actually have the lyrics so in the album The Boy with the Arab Strap, I have the vinyl, and inside there's a sort of cutout poster thing, and it has these lyrics which always stuck out to me from their song A Summer Wasting. But it says, I spent the summer wasting. The time was passed so pleasantly. 7 weeks of reading papers, 7 weeks of river walkways, 7 weeks of feeling guilty, 7 weeks of staying up all night. And I just love that, that little those set of phrases, because they do capture something about the kind of 7 weeks in the summer, staying back. I was always staying around campus in the summer, and there is a particular kind of feeling to that. And Belle and Sebastian, I think the Sundays capture it really
You
well.
just gave me, I use the word bolt, whatever. I literally just got a bolt of adrenaline when you said that. I mean, granted, I heard their singing voice, not yours,
Yeah,
but and this is why we talk, this is what's lost when you're just texting and sharing screenshots. I think that is a brilliant connection, and that is exactly the same feeling you get from the Sundays.
totally. Yes.
And it's um to make a more academic thing, I think and to go back to the Sundays, but it totally connects with that, is college mattered because we had this privilege of the structures and the investment and those civil rights demonstrators and the
Mm.
GI Bill and American exceptionalism. And I guess in the UK they had something similar, as through their labor. Um, College, as you said earlier, also mattered to music and culture in a way that didn't
Mm.
at all. So,
Hmm.
I think when you see, I know you're a Vegas fan, but you see like residencies, when you see these big festivals, that's what I'm talking about, gerontocracy. It's not about it's about going to Coachella or going to one of these big festivals. It's not about going to WJC and saying, "Hey, stop by, they'll play your song on the air," and they're a CMJ compiler, and then that peak, with the grunge bands and things, and kind of hitting this major peak. And I think that's where The Boy with the Arab Strap, that's my favorite. I was blanking on that. I couldn't remember if that was just the song or the album title, but that one totally, that is one of my also top 20 albums. And
Yeah, for sure.
I remember literally listening to it. It's very complicated. I won't bore you because we're almost there, but I was basically on a bus tour with my in-laws and my future wife in Rome. And they were like falling asleep. So I was listening to that and just looking out the bus, and it's like December, it's like also some kind of uh, like poem about the end of the millennial. Because I'm just looking out my window. It's like this gray day in Rome, and I'm listening to that song, in my headphones in this like coach bus, and it just imprinted itself on my mind, and it totally overlays. It's funny because I was also in grad school at that time. I think you're right. It's like a grad school version of my undergrad with the Sundays
Right.
capturing that feeling. And
And
I
where
don't know.
and where did I first listen to Belle and Sebastian? Because it was on a mixtape that someone gave me, and they were like, "You got to listen to this." It was, again, that's how we discovered things.
Totally. And I have a student to connect with that. Like he's a very classy guy. I say that because he mentioned me when he got into Penn after leaving the grad center that I was a Steve's advisor. Kwame Akron, he's a great guy. He had a rough time. His mom was a nurse who died early on of COVID in April 2020 when he
Ugh.
was in my class. So I feel very avuncular and like appreciative of him. But he's trying to figure out his dissertation. I think he's in like the music studies or musicology department at Penn, and he's started working on like cassette culture, and he bought all this like old cassette tapes and mixers, and like um he's a lot, I don't know how old he is, but he's a lot younger than me, probably a bit younger than you. It's again, I think that is where you're totally right with the idea of nostalgia trap. But I mean, going back to when I was in grad school reading Raymond Williams' Country and City, everyone moved. I mean, I did, you move maybe from a smaller city to bigger city. You move from the country to the city, like, oh, when I was a kid, we were shepherds and we sat around drinking mead and shooting our bow and arrows, or maybe a 80s version, we played our Atari 2600s and had fun, or Nintendo, uh, whatever my brother had the first. But you know what I'm saying? Then we think, well, of course things are worse now. But I totally think your whole premise of your show is something that I was kind of exploring with this too, thinking, well, of course, when you're young, you have more possibilities and you do
Right.
things for the first time. Of course, you're going to think that's better. But I do think, and again, I don't know if I articulate it well here, but there's a texture change. What would a structure of feeling would be a Raymond Williams term. The structure of feeling that we're living, it's not the same. And so to me, it's like the Sundays, they disappeared, but it's also that idea of college disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
People be saying, what's your major? How much debt do you have? Are you going to get a scholarship? Oh, do you know, Chicago? I mean, now it's just getting worse. Do you know Chicago doesn't even offer that major anymore? There's all this
Yeah.
bad news, but it already was being changed in that period. So it is like, and I guess the thing that I wanted to say about making it happy is the fact that we're connecting now, the fact that music continues to connect people. I think it has and when I was talking about with like Mike Peters and the alarm, like it encourages a different kind of participation. Even I know you're a film guy. Film's a little different. Now, of course, people can make short films and digital films and things, but you feel when you go to a jazz show and there's 50 people there, they need you there and they're giving you something you need or want also.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
different kind of participation. And that was kind of the thing that I think the Sundays, from just a structural, the way the record industry changed and things, they existed when they still could, like, because Rough Trade went out of business while they were on Rough Trade. I was just reading about that. You couldn't even buy like reading, writing, arithmetic till 1996 in the UK because Rough
Wow.
Trade like was like had an injunction on all their property and things. They had to get so they literally went through like when indie became you had to be on a main. Of course, Matador and you mentioned that there were a lot of indie labels, and I've seen Fugazi, a bunch of Discord bands, but it was becoming more corporate. And I'll see with your show as you move on because it gets harder to like love those late corporate where they're just like it's the end of the CD and we're like I won't go into all the bands that I don't really like from the late 90s, but once that ends, the idea of being a sellout, there's nothing to sell out. If you're
Right.
Pink Floyd, you can get a $500 million for your catalog. But if you're a new band, there's not, college radio doesn't have that function as a tastemaker. There's no, I don't know how you do it. You have to have an Instagram account or like get in a TikTok. You really need to get in a TikTok video or a Netflix
It's a
series to
different
be,
economy and it produces a different relationship to art. And it's one that I think we're sort of, I think, partly on 120 months, sort of trying to recover what was valuable about the moment that really preceded that big shift because it got washed out. Something got lost. And when I listen to the Sundays, there is a happiness in discovering it and a sadness in being like this world is gone
yeah.
that produced this particular band. Yeah.
I totally agree. And you could, I know you can wrap it up as you see fit here. I think we've hit a few high notes, but that's kind of why we'll always have a special place, I think for anyone who was there. And I do feel, because the other thing, I think two things. One is I'm not a revolutionary person. I took a couple classes at London School of Economics, and when I found out about Fabian socials, I'm like, that's me. Like, I want to work to make things better, but like, I don't want to throw like a pavement stone at a policeman and get shot at with tear gas. It's just not my style.
Totally.
But I do think the word revolutionary in the sense of like changing your sense of possibilities.
Hmm.
And I mean, I kind of, that's why I mentioned Walter Benjamin in my essay, not to be too academic, but like, I do think there's a total value in your project and there's a total value in thinking about like, well, what is not just I'm older in the Sundays, like what could be recovered?
Yeah.
What's possible? And I
Yeah.
think when I see on Reddit all these young people talking about how much they love the Sundays, or when I hear about Kwame working on mixtapes, I think that's like a real part of what people are looking for,
For
is the
sure.
kind of what can be recovered.
Well, thank you, David. David Humphries, everybody. Go listen to the Sundays, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and dream of another time. Whether you experienced it or not, I think that there's something in their sound and their vision that is unique and that really links onto whatever feeling we are trying to recover on both Nostalgia Trap and 120 months. So thank you, David Humphries. I appreciate talking with you, and I know
Thank
I know you're such a 90s music guy. I know you will be returning to the show because inevitably we're going to be. I think that as some of the extra material for 120 months beyond just the monthly discussions with John, I want to have like particular discussions about albums that stick out. And reading, writing, and arithmetic by the Sundays is one that I didn't expect to stick out, but I know there's going to be a lot of surprises along the way. So this was really fun. I thank you. for coming
Thank
on
you
the
for
show.
having me. I
Yeah.
think I'm going to listen to Sundays and The Boy with the Arab Strap later today.
Nice. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.